once again. So today we'll start with customer pay, and Moaffak is here, and he will host this session in the morning. And in the afternoon we'll do a small exercise on the value proposal. It's a team exercise again. And then after that, there's this barbecue event with Aaltoes. We expect 80 to 100 people, so we need your help because you're such a great cook, as we demonstrated yesterday. So we need your help. Just to make the salad, nothing more fancier, but we can't expect her to do everything for 100 people, right?
Svetlana actually postponed her bus, so she will be leaving at 11, so she has plenty of time to do the dishes.
So anyway, and then I'll try to handle the barbecue with you or with the guys. So. Any questions? Okay, so it's quite intensive for the next 3 days, so be prepared. All right? Moaffak.
Yeah.
I trust you introduce yourself.
I will.
Great. So I won't do it then. I get all the facts wrong anyway.
So, I don't have any slides, so just to introduce myself. I'm Moaffak Ahmed. I'm going to talk about customer pay. I don't know if you can see this, but it's my email address. If you have any questions, if you want to meet me, I'm happy to do one-on-one. Just send me an email. And indeed, the end is AC. It's not AC. It's a small island in the Atlantic called Ascension, and it can also mean accelerator, which is what we actually do. I come from a company called Veturi. We have an office here. We're an early stage investor, but with a twist. So we're very much hands-on early stage investors. So when we invest in a company, we also get very involved in the company, and together with the entrepreneurs, try to build it to the next step or to the next level. My background, I have some 20-something years of marketing and biz dev experience. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, 6 companies so far that I've founded or co-founded. One of them was a company called Trema. We started in the early 90s. We were doing financial software. We were, well, I don't know if you know the history of Finland, but in the early 90s was the worst recession we've ever had in the history of this country. Like, it was really bad. This financial crisis a few years ago was nothing compared to that. We decided to establish a software company which is doing financial software for the largest banks and multinational corporates in the world, which is a bit ironic because there was no software industry in Finland really at that time. Nokia was still making rubber boots and toilet paper. There was not really a financial market here, but still we kind of decided to go against all odds. An interesting side note, my co-founder, we were 4 guys, was Kai Head, who is now I think he's the chairman or something. He basically owns Rovio, or a big part of it, like Angry Birds company. And we spent 12 years building the company. We got our first customers in Sweden, ABB. We built their treasury center, which is like the in-house bank. And then we grew it, I think, to 50 million or something in revenues, 300 something people, all around the globe. I think we had 8 offices. Customers like European Central Bank, who is still today using the system to manage the entire foreign reserves of the euro land. We had Citibank, General Electric, Unilever, BMW. I mean, big customers. And I was in charge of that for marketing, kind of built the brand from scratch and made it like the #1 in the industry. But also as a founder, I was involved in many other things. Anything from setting up an office somewhere. I was the first one to move to the US. I was in charge of the launch there. I wasn't the American president, but I was in charge of the marketing kind of launch. Then lots of different things, mergers or acquisitions rather, some of them successful, some not so successful, and lots of other things that you get into when you are one of the founders. You're kind of fortunate or forced to do it. Anyway, I did that for 12 years, and then we sold the company in 2004, after which I started doing some angel investments, And then in 2008, we established Veturi together with a guy called Jussi Harvela. And now Veturi is kind of the main thing for us. We both have some like side investments. You might hear us talking about some other companies, but Veturi has at the moment 5 companies in the portfolio, and I'm happy to talk about them more if you're interested later on. Anyway, it's about customer pain, what I'm going to talk about, and I would like to do this kind of interactive. So I might like to ask questions from you. You can ask questions or comment or whatever, and let's try to do this kind of interactive. I think the first thing to talk about is kind of the definition of pain. What is meant by pain, because it sounds a bit somehow unpleasant. Another way of describing it is need. Your customer might need something. Usually, if you have a need, and then if it's not fulfilled for a long time, it can become a pain. And I don't know if you've studied psychology, but this is a very standard way to talk about needs or wants or pains for that matter. There's a guy called Abraham Maslow, and he had kind of like a pyramid or a hierarchy of needs. So at the bottom you have like physiological needs. You might be thirsty or hungry, so you need to fulfill that first. Then you can have like safety or security related. You need some shelter, and then you have psychological or social needs, and like there's self-actuation, I think, is the highest here. So anyway, the point here is that, at least according to this theory, is that if you haven't covered these needs, it's kind of useless to talk about self-actualization or some other higher kind of goal if the guy is really hungry or he doesn't have a home. But anyway, it's kind of interesting also to describe and compare this to companies, because I'd say that corporates also have needs, which could be described well, in many different ways. One is that you first need to survive, the corporate needs to survive, and blah, blah, blah. And maybe on the highest level, there's probably something related to their brand or their corporate social responsibility or some of the higher goals that companies might have. But it's just an interesting thing to look up if you check it on Wikipedia or somewhere, and you kind of, it's a good framework for thinking when you are thinking your own like project. What are you offering to your customers, and what is the value that you bring to them? And I think I have some notes here. I'm just going back to them. Okay, so just to give you some ideas of pain, to kind of make it familiar for you what I mean by pain. For instance, if you have a nail, you have a need for a hammer. That's a very basic need. But something more related to IT, for instance, you have, say you need to find stuff on the internet. Without search engines, it's quite impossible to find anything there. So search engines like Google and others are very useful for that. So that's as a customer or a user, you have that pain. I need to find something on the internet. I go on Google or Bing or some other search engine. On the other hand, advertisers have pains or needs. They need to find customers. And Google, I think, was the first one who actually demonstrated that with a search engine, you can easily and nicely match consumers and the corporates who are offering services or products for them. And there are lots of other examples of pain that we can discuss later. One thing which is actually very kind of fundamental also in this doesn't seem to have breaks, is painkiller versus vitamin. And this is another way of describing is must have versus nice to have. there are often products or services out there which the people think that they are like must-have. Everyone has to have this, whatever it is, gadget or service, like, I don't know, some sort of a new mobile social networks thingy. And in fact, it might not be a must-have. So it's not really a painkiller that you're offering. It might be more like a vitamin. It's kind of a nice to have. I mean, it might be good for you, just like vitamins are good for you, but it doesn't mean that I must spend a lot of money on these. Well, some people do spend a lot of money on vitamins and supplements and all the other stuff, but the point is really, the first fundamental question you need to ask yourself when you're building a company is, am I offering my customers a painkiller or a vitamin? And that's really, I mean, maybe we should take an example. Does someone want to volunteer to have a painkiller or vitamin? Yeah?
I think we have like this cross-platform thing.
Yeah.
And for developers, it was like for 20 or more years.
Yeah.
But you have to develop one code and transfer to a different platform,
Yeah.
like do a copy of code in different language.
So what is that? Is the
I think
painkiller
it's
or?
pain.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think painkiller for some customers, vitamin for others.
And what is your offering?
It's a offering that makes allows people to work very efficiently and flexibly in a very network model system work we have today.
Mhm.
So for somebody it's a real pain in the ass
Yeah.
because they are running in their inbox, and for them it's a painkiller, and somebody else it's vitamin.
Yeah. So, but it's really important that you kind of think about what you're offering and what it actually means to the customer or the user.
So, is this Apple stuff like iPads and stuff,
Yeah.
is it like more vitamins?
That's a very good question. Okay, I'll give an example. My phone, it's a very nice phone, but the button here, it's a mechanical button and it's broken. I need to take it to the repair shop. I mean, you might say that the phone is a nice to have. Any phone is as good as any other. But unfortunately, I realized that because I need to take this now to the repair shop and they're going to open it and probably spend 1 or 2 or 3 days or whatever, and maybe a week. I have no idea. I realized that this is an essential part of my life. I have all my emails, my calendars, I have everything there. So in that sense, I'd say that it's probably an essential part of my life. I mean, yeah, probably. But then our gadgets in general, painkillers or vitamins, must have or nice to have. Yeah, I mean, we can debate that, but and it depends on. It's also one thing which is important to mention. It is not. It's like it varies from individual to another, or company from another. So this might be a painkiller or must-have to me, but for someone it's just another phone or just another gadget. Yeah.
I think the case here might be that it was a vitamin when you bought it.
Yep.
It's an apple, and then it becomes a painkiller.
Yes, because I'm outsourcing a lot of my thinking, and my life has been outsourced to these gadgets. So they are becoming more and more must-have. And that's, some people might think that it's sad. Maybe it is, I don't know. But then, we're talking about customer pain, nice to have versus must have, whether your offering is a painkiller or a vitamin. And that's kind of very essential for you to figure out.
Could it be that many services are at first vitamins, they add some value to you, but when you have history of using them, there is so much information and they are essentially part of your organization or way of working or way of living, and then they are like what has happened to you. Now, even that device is so important because it has so much information.
It's a very good point. I think Facebook is a good example. No one needs Facebook, but I mean, still, I don't know how much time we spend on it, but it's a lot of hours, and I think you're very right. It started as a kind of nice to have, connect with your friends, but now for many people it's probably an essential part of their daily lives. They need to communicate with their friends and share information, and so it's becoming more essential. So it's going from nice to have to must have. That is a very good point. So another thing to consider when you're thinking of these pains is...
One question I have about
it's
Facebook. I mean, you said they must connect with their friends, but why can't they send email? Why can't they call? Why it has to be Facebook only?
Don't ask me.
No, I'm just...
I've asked the 600 million people who are using it. Well, I'm using it as well. No, okay, but I mean, I think it's email. I use text messages, I use the phone to call actually, and I use many other tools. So for me, Facebook, I probably could live without Facebook. Yes. I know lots of other people who probably would have a big gap in their life if they didn't.
I think that Facebook and all the other social media tools are examples that for most people they solve different pains. For example, for me, Facebook is more on the leisure side, Twitter is more on the business side, and then the real business stuff I handle through email and calling and SMS or whatever. So that's the case with many people. Of course, there are 1,000 ways to do that, but the point is that, for example, Facebook and Twitter, they have a different pain that they're solving.
Yeah, and also,
I just have one comment. I saw a discussion about these things on some forum online, and one point that kind of struck me is that they were saying that, for instance, things like Angry Birds and so on, they are not really painkillers, but they are drugs, some sort of drugs. And
good point.
The actual problem with like trying to do a drug is that it's very risky because you compete with various things, leisure, Facebook. You can compete at the same time with Facebook and Warcraft and this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point because I mean, I don't know if you want to spend that much time on Facebook or like Angry Birds, but the point is that indeed, yes, you could classify them as drugs, and I think it's also about not just sharing with your friends, but it's actually killing time in a sort of fun way. And if you think of what people have been doing for ages, I mean, since the early days, or at least last century, you had radio, you had TV, you had theater, you had variety and cinema and all the others, opera. I don't know if they're drugs or what, but at least, I mean, people need to have also, I mean, I have this hierarchy of needs. So at some point, when you have your food and your, like your nourishment and you have your shelter and everything, at some point you need a bit more kind of, you have psychological needs or social needs. And I think that these, like Facebook and Angry Birds and these are very much on once you have the basic needs covered, then you enter this realm of higher level needs that can be satisfied then with this kind of show.
I think one great example, and of course very relevant as of today, is Skype.
Yeah.
Because there, of course, the pain was the cheaper calls, anywhere, anytime, and their slogan is free calls. It's very simple. So that's how they've started to solve the pain, and now they're expanding into different areas. And that's also a very good sort of lesson to startups, that first you need to define a single pain and solve that one first. If you try to solve 10 pains to begin with, you're never gonna solve anything. And soon, I assume we'll have Skype phones that run Windows are manufactured by Nokia or something like that. So that's the next step maybe. Yeah. But it's just a great example that they have a very, very clear pain that they're solving every time. They just have different means of solving it currently, rather than just the free voice over IP calls.
Yeah, I'm coming back to actually that point later. But good point. No, good point. But as I introduced or explained in the beginning, my background is very much from B2B. So many of my examples might be from B2B, but I suppose they can be also implied, or they can be applied to the B2C world. So I think one of the interesting questions, at least in B2B, is whose pain are we talking about? So, for instance, well, one thing which is often talked about in like sales theories or sales courses and so on is kind of like a pain chain. So you have you're here, and then there might be even more in this chain, but you're selling to someone something, but you're actually solving someone's, like this is you, this is a corporate, and this is maybe a user. So for instance, many of Veturi's investments are these kind of B to B to C. So for instance, what would be a good example? Like Sensec, which is one of our companies, they provide a very cool technology in haptics. Haptics is tactile feedback. So on a touchscreen, I normally don't I don't feel anything, but with Sensec technology, I actually can feel virtual buttons and virtual textures. It's an amazing technology, which we believe can improve considerably the usability of touchscreens and all kind of touch-operated devices. But here, it's a good example of, we've spoken to like lots of people who, especially in the US, actually complain that they don't buy an iPhone or touchscreen phones because they still want to have the physical keyboard, or many other explanations. Yeah, exactly. But this is an example of kind of like a pain chain. So there's someone who wants to have something like a consumer, but then there's someone in the middle who is actually solving this. I mean, we're not selling the Sensec technology directly to the consumers. We're selling it, we kind of make a deal first with the OEMs or ODMs, and then they actually deliver the solution or the end gadget product to the consumer. And I think this is also important to understand in any situation or case where you're building your solution or offering, because it can be much more complex than this. It can be, I mean, it doesn't have to be B2B2C. It could be like several companies in a value chain, and you need to figure out your position there, and who you're actually selling and what the different pains are. Because of course, these guys here in the Sensec example, they also have a pain because they'd like to sell more touchscreen devices, but the customers are complaining that they don't like the screen because it doesn't have tactile feedback. So actually, we can also talk about like a pain chain. This kind of a pain chain can also appear within organizations. So if you're selling to a large corporate, for instance, some solution, there might be, like for instance, in your case, when you're selling this game platform or game development platform, you might have the individual developer, like the guys who are actually writing code. Then you might have the head of the studio or head of games, or someone who has several teams under him. You might have then the owner of the game company. There are lots of different players in this picture who might have slightly different pains. Like the developers might have a pain that I don't know, the tools that they use are not good, or that they need to, first I need to develop something for Android, and then I need to jump to develop it for a console game or something. At least this is the pain for the head of the studio. The guy on top of this kind of organization might then have the problem or the pain that we're spending too much money and too much time on developing different games on different platforms. Whereas if we have one solution for all the different platforms, then it will be faster, time to market is essential, and we can make more money faster. But it's important that you whatever your industry or your offering, that you figure out these relationships, who you're selling and who is going to benefit from your offering, and try to understand really who you need to talk to and how you kind of package your offering, because it's not always obvious. And then one classic example of kind of another type of sales, I don't know, it's not really a theory, but one of those schools of thought in sales literature talks about the different influencers in the buying decision. Like, again, this is from a B2B scenario, but still might be relevant for others as well. So you can have a user, you can have the technical buyer and the business guy. So there's someone who is actually feeling the pain, then you usually have the IT who has some concerns about the technology that you're offering to them, and then there's the guy who actually has who writes the check. So I think a similar example could be from a consumer's environment, a family, where you actually have and I'm not going to take this very far, this example, because someone might say that I'm biased, but anyway. So you have the mother and the father and the kids, and well, they have different opinions, let's put it this way, and they value different things. So if you're buying a new gadget, a new car, or a new TV, or a new whatever, each one of these players in the family unit have their opinions and their different values, and you really, if you're selling something to that family unit, you need to figure out how to actually make a convincing case for the mother and the father and also the kids. So then, sorry, yeah.
Like how important is the reference customer? If we think of Trema, you had this early 90s, you had this wonderful company, Valuebased, weekend, like a Swedish and Swiss combination, and they were like the top of the moon at early 90s, and then you just said to the world that, okay, we have sold something for ABB, and they are very happy with it. Of course, that reference customer opened the doors for all the others. Could it be that that is many times the case, that if you solve a good customer problem, then you can use it as a reference? So,
excellent point. Especially in B2B, the value of the reference customer is immense. I would probably recommend giving your service or solution for free if you can get a reference customer that is valuable, like the brand is valuable. But when you do these deals, you need to make sure that you have the permission of the reference customer to use their name, and that they are actually your kind of advocate. Because you're exactly right. We were a small company from Finland. No one had heard of us, or any technology coming out of Finland, really. Then we are, I mean, if you think of how expensive it is to build a brand, at that time there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, no social media. The internet was something quite different what we have today. So it was quite costly actually to build a brand. And in any case, no one had heard of Trema. Everyone had heard at that time of ABB, Electrolux, Ericsson, Volvo, which actually were the customers in this chain or this order that we got them. So we got the first ABB, and then once kind of someone has said that this is actually quite cool, then it's almost like a domino effect. These 4 largest companies, or 3 largest after ABB in Sweden, just followed quite fast or quickly, because they thought that, okay, there's someone we know who's actually taken the first risk, because the first customer is always the trickiest, because it's a huge risk for them to, they have all their systems in place, they have their, whatever they're used to, and then they need to jump to something which is unknown. It's a massive risk that they perceive that they are taking, at least. And if there's someone who, like the first reference customer that you have, who can actually say that this is all right, this is great, I made the jump or the leap, and I'm really happy with this. That is so valuable, because then, I mean, it's going to save so much money from your marketing and brand building and kind of raising the awareness. We exploited these customers in a very nice way with their consent, and they were happy to do this because they were happy with our product. We used them so much in all of our communications. We just put these guys from ABB or Unilever or European Central Bank, and they were just saying, we were looking at the market, we scanned the market, then we had these needs or these pains, we found these different solutions, and this one solution that we then finally chose, we're very happy with. And it was just amazing. I mean, if you can make the customers do your job, yeah, why not? You should do it. I mean, it's the same thing in excuse me, in consumer marketing. I mean, who do you trust? You trust your friends, usually. I mean, like word of mouth is extremely important in B2C. So for instance, if there's a new social networking solution or say Spotify or any other kind of new service, who do you trust? You usually trust someone who is already using it and they are recommending it to you. It's the same if it's a new film or a new book or a travel destination, a hotel or whatever. It's always easier if you have these reference customers who can then recommend it to their friends or their contacts. So it works both in B2B and B2C. Maybe the methods for actually exploiting it they might be then different from B2B and B2C, but I think nowadays they might be more and more converging, because Twitter and all the other tools are making these two worlds in a way converging. But then the other thing I wanted to talk about is what is the actual pain that you think that you're solving? And again, this is not obvious. I think it was Henry Ford who once famously said, or he was quoted saying, if I had listened to my customers, I would be, because what the customers said that they want faster horses. And of course that's not really the case, but I mean, in this Henry Ford's example, the important thing is to figure out what your customers want to do. So in this faster horses example, they want to go from A to B faster than they could earlier. So instead of providing faster horses or some, I don't know, wagons or whatever, he just turned it upside down and provided cars, so which are kind of horseless wagons or whatever you want to call it. So I think that it's really essential to understand what your customers want and what the real need is, because it might not be that obvious. Do you know, for instance, what your customers need? Can you articulate that?
Customers need to build a system, but they have no tools. They have no weapons to scale their business.
Yeah.
They do everything themselves.
Yeah.
They cannot share information.
Okay, this is very good, because you actually listed many different pains or needs, and that, I think, if you're providing a service or a tool or a product or a gadget or whatever, you should really figure out. In most cases, customers don't need more tools or gadgets, or I mean, the technological solution that you're providing them is actually not what they need. It is something usually higher level. In your case, it might be that your customers want to do more sales. They want to make more money. And for that, they're not happy with the current solutions, so they need something which is more efficient, or it better solves their needs. And it turns out that there is indeed a technological solution that could do that better for them than the existing solutions. But it's not that, because it's very often so that especially in the technology world, people get too fascinated with the tools themselves or the offering that they have. So they think that customers want a gadget or a piece of software or something, and it's not really. It's just a means to an end. So, for instance, companies, can you explain what is your customer's need?
The need is to report. The need is for the agencies to report to the clients whether it pays off to spend money on social media.
Yeah. And the customer needs to understand if we actually, is it worth spending money on
the customer just wants a simple answer.
Yeah.
Do I earn something by investing in social media or not?
Yeah.
And the pain is for the agency to actually answer that question. Otherwise, the clients will stop investing or will choose another agency that will find that.
Mm-hmm. And that's very good because it's, I mean, if you would just say that we have this wonderful tool and it does all the other blah, 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 it kind of misses the point in a way, because it also, it usually, if you're focusing too much on the tool that you're providing, you start just listing features. We have this and this and this and this and this and this feature, and it's kind of just overwhelming the customer. Whereas the really important thing is it solves X, whatever the X is. It's a higher business need or something, and then you can translate it into, like, it solves X because of this and this feature, for instance. And this is actually I'm going to come back to this in a while. But then I think kind of an example, interesting example also is especially in technology, is this what we see a lot is like a technology that is looking for a problem that it can solve. So I don't know how many pitches you've heard in your lives, but at least we, as investors, we hear like hundreds of pitches every year. And often there are these things that someone says that we've created this gadget, we've created this technology platform or this product or whatever thingy. And the question is like, so, like why? Or, I mean, people, it's, especially, I'm very sorry if this sounds prejudiced, but I have nothing against engineers, and I have a big respect for engineers, but I think engineers often have this tendency of thinking too much about the gadget or the solution or the product itself and not how it's used and who uses it. So this typical example is like when you talk to someone in engineering, at least in the old days, they said that, oh, we don't need marketing because if we build the best machine in the world and we kind of just put it here for everyone to see and we list all the technical details of the technical specifications, everyone, like at least any intelligent person in the world, will figure out that this is the best gadget in the world and that's why we're going to buy it. So it's going to sell itself. And yeah.
Why cars are sold to consumers based on a list of technical stuff? Every weekend in Helsinki, there's a table on we have this and this and this, and our competitors they don't have. So
that's a good point. I don't claim to be an authority on this, so I don't know if this is the right answer. But my guess is that because I've seen this in many cases actually working. Like for instance, in my previous life, we were selling this financial software for banks, like financial institutions and the largest corporates in the world. The price tag of the system was 1 million and up. And it took like 6 to 12 months just to do the selection process of the system, and the implementation of the system took 6 to 12 months. But the funny thing, and the really bizarre thing, was that you would expect that you have a bank, for instance, one of the largest banks in the world, the largest corporates in the world, doing really rational decision making. Like it's a business tool, and it's solving a business need, and it's and all the other very rational reasons. So we'll do it very in a logical and rational, consistent way. The selection of these systems. And actually, what we realized is that at some point in the early stage, the systems were quite different. So our system had these features and the others didn't have them maybe, and that's why we kind of got the deal. But as the industry matures, there's not really much difference in the different systems. I mean, if you compare, we have these 5 features and they have the 5 features. And it boils down very much into emotional side of things, like psychological things. And I think we noticed many times that our customers are selecting our system because, for instance, the European Central Bank is using it. If you are a central bank in another country, somewhere, like outside Europe, for instance, and you're selecting a system, and who, at least that time, we're talking about the 90s and early 2000s, the European Central Bank was like the creme de la creme, like the central bank in the world, like the model. So what they had selected was kind of the benchmark of the industry. And for other people, companies or central banks then to select, it was kind of almost like yeah, we'll just go for this. And then later on, once they've done this kind of the emotional decision that we select this system, then they go back and they do all the rational, logical, like the rationalization of this.
First it's an emotional decision, and then they are using the rational system to sell it to themselves.
I did that. I was buying a car a few years ago. I had a short list of 2 or 3 cars. I was living in France at that time. I had a budget, and I knew that I want maybe a small French car because it's in France, so it's maybe easiest to get repaired and blah blah blah. Or maybe a German car because it's reliable and blah blah blah. So then I didn't know anything about cars, so I went with my friend. We were driving around the area where I lived, and we went through all the car shops there. And I had this list. Like, these are the rational reasons why I want this kind of. I'm looking at these 2 cars basically with this budget. Then we one day, or at some point, we drove kind of past one shop, and I saw a car there, which was really nice. It was a small Alfa Romeo, and then we took it on a test drive, and I just said, "That's really nice." Then we continued the day, went to all the other car shops, and I was really thinking, you know, really nice that Alfa. And it was not a French car, and it was not a reliable German car. It was an Italian car, and it was very expensive compared to it was double my budget. But then I went to the internet, and I started finding all the facts that could justify the purchase. It was selected car of the year in 2001 or what, I don't know, something. And then I could justify to my friends and to myself that it actually makes sense to buy this.
And the cars are, of course, they're sold based on this emotional stuff. There's always this sport on somebody driving the car on the French Riviera and empty roads, which never happens in reality, but you get the image.
Yeah.
But I believe cars are like an extreme example of that, because I mean this is like purely like value-based pricing, and even like recently there are like we see some at least some figures, right, in advertising, like emission level, petrol expenditure, but still it's again addressing the kind of emotional side, you know. Low emissions, I care for nature, which is like very fashionable nowadays.
The rational part in cars, that's the pain. You have to be able to get from place A to B and get your family and stuff to a cottage and so on. So that defines what you need, what you're paying. And then all of this emotional stuff is vitamins on top of it, and maybe some drugs also.
Well, yeah, I think because any and every car probably takes you from A to B.
Yeah. So the customer paying is filled with Dacia.
So it's actually, so then the point is, if every player in the industry solve the basic pain of getting you from A to B, then it's irrelevant to talk about getting, I mean, ads don't say that it gets you from A to B.
No.
I mean, so it's kind of leveling and it's the next level then.
Go to YouTube and look at car ads from something like 60s. They say that this takes from A to B reliable.
Yeah, exactly.
So then it doesn't.
In my earlier job, my best salesperson, he divided customers to 3 roles, and he adjusted himself to these roles. there are a green person, a red person, and a blue person. Let's start with the blue. That is the engineering part. This is where you provide lots of information. The customer needs lots of information to make the decision. So it might be like the horsepower, and it might be about the emissions, and it might be even that this is great Toyota because it is smart, it doesn't get dirty, it doesn't look dirty. Maybe the resale value is very good. That is the blue person. Then the green person is the one who buys probably the easy choice. Maybe it parks itself, or maybe it's maybe it's the French car. They are like nice, they are easy, they are, you know, something like that. And then you have this blue person, red person, and red person definitely don't want to have the one that parks itself. He doesn't want to have automatic these gears. Like the green person definitely wants to have automatic. He has a choice. Maybe even air conditioning would be in the but the red person, he just wants to have limited edition. So it must be something very unique and only for Alpha guy. Yeah. And he was so good at his job. He made 5 times more sales than the second best because he always adjusted, and always before calling the customer he had a reference from the earlier one. Can you imagine being 5 times better than the second best? Amazing guy.
I don't know if you've encountered this, but I've at least many of my friends or people I know who are like techies from a background, and for some reason many of them hate Apple products because it's especially like when I showed my iPad to them, like, oh, I don't like it because you can't configure it, and I want Linux and all the other stuff. And then when you give them an iPad, or actually then someone kind of gives it, the wife gives it or buys it, or he buys it for his wife or something, and then a few months later they're just sold. I mean, they think that it's the best thing on earth, and but I mean, this somehow you need to be aware of also this kind of your customers might be using rational reasons to be against your solution, like it cannot work because of X, Y, and Z. So that's kind of the other side of this. But then I think one important thing is also, again, maybe some of my examples are from B2B, but I'm sure you can find from B2C as well, kind of accidentally creating new pains or problems. And this is something that you don't always realize, but it might be the biggest obstacle for you to do any sales. So again, going back to this engineering example, that if I make the best machine in the world, it's going to sell itself, and it's kind of a no-brainer. Everyone will think that it's the best thing and they're going to buy it. And then we hear often these pitches that people are saying that this is so, and they list kind of rational reasons why this is so much better than any of the existing solutions. So then, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur, you think that it's gonna, I mean, it's self-evident, or like it's 100% sure that it's gonna be the most successful product in the world because it's so much better than all the others. And often, many products or services flop because they don't realize that when they introduce something, it either creates new problems or pains, or there's something that they didn't take into consideration. So, again, I'll take an example from my previous life because I know something about it. We had a, I'm gonna draw this so we get it. There's a very, very short lecture on the financial markets and how a trading room works in a bank or a large entity anyway. You have so this is the trading room of a bank. You have the front office, middle office, and back office. And front office is where they look at the screens and they get all the market information, and then they do all the trading, like they buy or sell something, whether it's pork bellies or the Japanese yen or Nokia stock or whatever, it doesn't matter. The back office is where then, when these guys do the deal, these guys then process it, like it's the bookkeeping or accounting or bank transfers, and kind of they are then processing the deals, or it's also called sometimes operations. And then here in the middle, there's middle office, which is risk management. So they're kind of overseeing this whole thing and trying to make sure that these guys don't do too many risks, and these guys don't do anything funny. So these boxes here, or squiggles, they represent different IT systems. In a typical bank or any other kind of financial institution or any trading room, actually, if you'd walk there 10, 20 years ago, they used to have lots of different systems. For every single thing they were doing, they had different systems. So for instance, in front office, if you're trading in currencies or foreign exchange, you would have one system. If you had bonds or something, you would do one thing or use another system. If you were doing commodities, you would have one system, and so on. And the same thing for risk management, you would have different systems, and also for back office. For different tasks, you would have different IT systems. And these often, in the early days, they were built by the IT staff of the bank themselves. They had huge IT budgets and staffs building this kind of proprietary solutions, these kind of point solutions. There were some software companies, there still are, who are doing this kind of very dedicated specialist things. And then this created a lot of market for consultants, because if you wanted to know your risk position, i.e. what's happening in the entire operation, you actually had no clue, and there were massive risks. So consultants would then do some sort of middleware or data warehouse or whatever to connect all these systems together, to patch them so that you would actually have the big picture. So what we came up with was this. One system that integrates all these different operational units and all these different tasks that they wanted to do, all the different instruments that they wanted to do, everything in one system. And it was real time, and it had all the bells and whistles and all the arguments why we could say that you can see in real time your entire position in every instrument anywhere in the globe. If this was the best thing in the market. It still is. But from a marketing and sales point of view, why this is a really difficult proposition to sell is that you have so many players inside here who are against you. There's someone who created this system, who might still be head of IT or someone. Then there's this guy who is really in love with this system that he's using. Then there's the boss who is overseeing this whole thing, and he finds this is really risky. So because this kind of works, all this himmeli in Finnish, it's a Christmas decoration, kind of funny thing. All of this works, so why should we replace it? The arguments were clear for our system, that it has all the kind of bells and whistles, and it has, the value proposition was very clear, but the jump was just massive. To replace we had one customer who was a global player. They had, I think, 30 different systems that they had to dump for ours when they moved to our system. So in the early days, we found it really difficult to convince our customers, because we thought that we had all the rational arguments for them, and it should be a no-brainer. Actually, the interesting thing here is also that customers even didn't know that you could have one system that can do all. They were doubting this. We could show that it works. We had customers that were using it, but they would say, yeah, but we're different. We use, and then they had some other arguments why it wouldn't work for them. It might work for everyone else on this planet, but for them, they are special because they have this thing or that thing. And it took a lot of time, like a lot of evangelizing, like making the market aware that it is actually possible to do this in one system. It took a lot of references. We had to convince, like once you get the 10 references, it's always easier to get 11th. But to get the first 10, it is a big task. Or if you're going to a new market, for instance, for us, we had like a massive, really impressive customer list in Europe. We went to the US market, never heard. ABB, never heard. Ericsson, never heard. So it was kind of, we had to build again in the US everything from scratch. And this is something that people don't often realize. Again, I'm talking about B2B, but I think this applies to B2C. It's not just about building the best IT system, and which would then sell itself. You actually need to think a lot how you package it, what is the opposition that you're going to face in the customer, like the buying organization, and how you're going to tackle that. And that can be really daunting. I think that a good example here is that at least at Vettori we use this kind of a rule of thumb that when we look at budgets, for instance, if R&D takes one unit, like €1, 1,000 euro, 100,000 euro, whatever, you should prepare to pay 5 to 10 euros or 5 to 10x for the go-to-market. So to actually take it to the market. Of course, you can argue that in B2C, it's cheaper, you just send a few Twitter messages and it's going to sell itself. I don't know, I'm happy if you have that. I mean, it's great, but at least in most cases, what we see is that to really, it's an iterative process because, of course, you kind of, it's like banging your head against the wall several times and learning what are actually the real pains for the customer, what are the real reasons for them to buy things, and why they value certain things more than others, even though logically it would be the other way around, and so on and so on. So you need to do this back and forth many times. And it's, of course, it would be nice to get it once, like with your first try to get it right, but usually it doesn't go like that. So you need to iterate, and that is expensive, especially in B2C, B2B at least, where you have to have a sales force, whether it's direct or through a channel, but still, it is costly. And so that's something that you need to prepare for.
I have one question about the B2B sales.
Sure.
I think you mentioned that it's more emotional, but I think for B2B, it's first the rational, then the emotional part comes. For B2C, it may be the other way around, that first it's emotional, and then maybe you justify it as you did with Alfa Romeo. I don't know.
Okay, it depends. I think from our experience, okay, yeah, well, it's rational until you get to the short list.
Yes.
So, exactly. Okay, so the way at least it works in B2B, it's that you have a long list, and then you have a short list, and then you make the decision. So a long list is something that you have a summary intern, for instance. The boss says, like, find me information about all the systems that can do X, whatever X is, like to do this, for instance. Then the summary intern compiles a long list, which is maybe 30 systems or something, or it's like if you're looking for like anything, also from consumer point of view, if you're looking for TVs or stereo or something, you have a long list of like 10 or 20 gadgets. Then you narrow it down to a short list, which is maybe 3 to 5, which you start looking at in more detail. And my point is that to get on the long list, you need to, it's done on based on logical and rational arguments. But once you get, and also from long list to short list is probably rational.
Yeah.
But then when you have maybe 3 alternatives to choose from, I'd say that then it gets usually quite emotional or psychological factors are more important than the rational ones.
Right.
Because it's just, at least, like I said, it's probably the same in if you're buying a TV or a stereo or a car or whatever. All of them do basically the same thing. I mean, there are not massive differences nowadays between Samsung and LG and Sony TVs. We could argue this for a long time, but I claim that pretty much they work the same. The same with cars, the same with anything really, if the market is mature.
I think an argument for what you're saying is that if it would be rational until the end, then it really wouldn't matter who's the sales rep.
Exactly. Yeah.
Within the last half a year, sort of, I found that in certain places, like we get asked this question, like, what's your go-to-market strategy?
Yeah.
And that's always sort of like a sort of question that you start to like, well, we're going to do this and that and so forth.
Yeah.
But sort of the expectation that people expect when they ask this question is to like snap 2-sentence like pitch of go-to-market strategy. So, and we've never really found like the really sort of good answer for that. So my question is what's the 2-sentence go-to-market strategy for this example of yours?
For this one,
yeah.
Find the opinion leaders and convince that this is the best solution and recruit them as your advocate. So, because instead of spending a lot of money on advertising and saying that our system is the best, we would find the early adopters, the first first organizations in the world who would be willing to take a risk. We would give the system for a very heavily discounted price, but we would then have the first reference that we could use. So those are very valuable from a go-to-market point of view. But I think in general, the answer to this go-to-market, there's not really a good, it's usually, you try different things and something works. And then
you iterate. I mean, you have to iterate because at least as a startup, you probably don't know where it will start to stick.
Yeah.
I mean, the sticky point is something you don't decide, the customer decides.
I have a question about your experience. When you said about the opinion leaders, did you go immediately to the largest companies? Or did you try
good point. Very good point. The answer is yes, but okay. We wanted to sell. Our original thing was that we wanted to sell this kind of vision to the largest banks on Wall Street and the City of London and all the other financial centers in the world. What we found out, and of course they wouldn't buy from us because they thought that we're it was ridiculous to think that a small Finnish kebab shop with no references could sell to the largest banks in the world. But the interesting thing is that we actually, our first customer was ABB, which is not a bank. So they had, I don't want to bore you with too many details of the history, but basically it was, there was kind of like, there's one area which is like the banks, which was, we thought that we will find a customer here. But actually in the, there's another market here, which is corporate treasury, like large multinational corporates who also have trading rooms, who also have needs, which actually are quite similar to this. But they don't have large IT staff, at least to manage these kind of systems or to build them. And ABB especially was interesting for us because it was a new company. It was just, in the early 90s, it was established as a merger. There was ASEA from Sweden and Brown Boveri from Switzerland, and these two were merged. So in a merger, there's always a situation where they have to select which systems we're going to keep and which we're going to dump. So the end result is that we keep these, or then we dump everything and start from scratch. And we managed to enter the situation just when they were thinking like, how we're going to do this whole thing. So we got them as a reference customer, and then we had a customer here, which was not in our target market. It was not one of those we thought we want, but it was easier to penetrate the market here. Another example of this kind of periphery is like emerging markets. Some of our first customers, I don't remember which number it was, but one of the first ones was the Central Bank of Estonia in the 94 maybe or something. It was recently, it has regained its independence recently, and they didn't have any of this junk here. They didn't have any history. They kind of needed to start from scratch. So they were not one of these big Wall Street banks. They were in the periphery. They didn't have this kind of legacy, and they didn't have the kind of the pride that we cannot buy from a small Finnish player. So we got a customer here. And then the next one here in the periphery was in Saudi Arabia, the subsidiary of ABN AMRO, a Dutch bank. We could not go to ABN AMRO directly, but we got them in the periphery. Next in South Africa, and so on and so on. So I think from a go-to-market point of view, you really need to think, even though you want to get, I don't know, IBM or someone as your customer, you should practice with the periphery. Let's put it this way.
But in your case, was it like intentionally that you went after this periphery, or
No.
you just
No. We
went after all, and
no,
then
of course we tried to get here, but no one buys from you because you have no credibility. You have to go first to the periphery. No, sorry, you don't necessarily have to go to the periphery. You should talk to the big guys, but it might just happen so that the first decision is made in the periphery, which might be geographical periphery or from an industry segment point of view periphery.
But talking to the big guys from like day one, right?
Yeah, just go ahead. I mean, it doesn't. Well, why not?
I mean, one thing I would like to comment. I mean, you can definitely try it, but they will not buy until you have proven with somebody else.
Yeah.
That's what I feel.
But it's also good to
get the feedback.
Get punched in the face every once in a while. I mean, it's got to figuratively speaking.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, that's good that you get this kick.
You learn. At least they tell you what they need and what they. I mean, how far you are off from what they want.
Exactly.
I see too many hands. I don't know, just randomly.
Yeah, I believe that there are some dinosaurs like in Nordics, or let's say banks, Merita Bank for instance, we had so old systems that Trema would have been very difficult to integrate. The APIs would have been very, very difficult to those Tietotehdas systems. And also like Citigroup, when they do acquisition, they don't like think what kind of system the company has. They just take over, they clean it up and take their own system because it's just a dinosaur. It's a huge system and it's very difficult to sell IT system to Citigroup because they have their own and you cannot just build APIs. It's got some kind of, I don't know, monster there.
We did have Citigroup and Nordea, but like some smaller units there. Not the entire thing, but smaller unit.
It's kind of early customer development. How much do you see it as kind of like this opportunistic? Like you had this customer that just kind of was related to what you were looking for, but just kind of popped up for whatever reasons. And how much is kind of really targeted plan? I have my list of 5, and let's go after that. What's your kind of where is the line between opportunism and planning? Let's say.
Depends on your funding. If you have endless funding, I mean, just go for the 5 big and that's it. But in real life, I would be rather opportunistic. It's I don't know. I often use the example that running a company is like sailing. There are two kind of people. There are sailors, and then there are motorboat people. Motorboat people are when there's point A, here's point A, and here's point B, and I just go straight from A to B. Sailors actually realize that to get there, I need to do maybe something like this, because the wind and the market conditions or something just makes it so that I have to kind of, I can't go with a sailboat straight like that. And this is something that often is forgotten, especially if you have okay, I'm going very much on a tangent here, but if you have a consultant who does your business plan, and you don't do it yourselves, then often it looks very much like going from A to B, like a straight line. That is what investors would like to hear also when you talk about your go-to-market, and actually it's not like that, because it's more like kind of zigzag. Of course, it's good that you know where you're heading, what your end goal is, but you might need to go quite far there to actually end up there.
The story should always be the A to B story, even though the reality is often much different. It's this kind of
kind of.
Yeah, I was thinking about, you were talking about the emerging markets and how you achieve customer value out there. From their perspective, what do you think was the most important benefit? Was it like price benefits, that you could be lower in price? Or was it benefits in technology, that they could leapfrog in technology?
Yeah.
What do you think was the most important?
Emerging markets are really good in so many different ways. They don't have the legacy of these old systems. They don't have an IT manager who has been 20 years in the company, who has built this massive army of programmers who are doing proprietary solutions. And there's no one in love with some existing junk that they might have. So you don't need to fight these kind of internal battles, or you don't need to end up in this kind of political swamp. It's usually quite straightforward. I mean, okay, there are other things then in emerging markets which might make it colorful and interesting, but still, at least the point is that there's no legacy. You can go straight in. And that's what, I mean, it's the same thing with kids. That's why marketers are trying to get the kids very early, because they're not yet loyal to some brand, or they haven't made their choice of something. So it's kind of get them early.
So they could be more interested in your products from like a technology perspective, that it solves the problem better.
Yeah, I mean,
that from like the emotional.
It's let's take an example. Like, I mean, it's usually about better technology. It's like rational reasons also. Like the emerging markets in most cases at the moment are skipping much of the technology that we have had here for tens of years, like all the fixed landlines and all that crap. They don't need to build a massive infrastructure, because they can leapfrog directly to like 3G networks or 4G or whatever they're called. So they just don't need to go through they can select the best technology today without any of the burden of the history or the kind of legacy.
Could you share in your experience how to get from the long list to the short list just to get the customer?
It varies a lot from I mean, it depends on the case totally. If it's if it's like a governmental case or a public tender, this kind of thing, it is pretty much impossible to influence the process. Then you just need to make, because they usually say that there's a deadline for submitting your offer, and after that there's no communication between you. You can't ask, before submitting the proposal there's a period when you can ask questions, and after that there's no communication between you and the buyer. Or maybe the buyer will call some companies just for an interview or something. In this case, you can't really influence the decision making anymore. But what you can do in those cases as well is to actually know the market well enough, know the buyers, and B, talk to them before they start making their selection process. But in some cases where the selection process is more flexible, you can actually influence them in so many ways. You go to meet them, you present your case, you show that you try to argue why your system is better or why your solution is better than the others. You try to understand their needs, how your thing fits better their needs. I mean, it's like a sales process, but it really depends on how formal or rigid the selection process is. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I can spend more time with you if you want to talk about this.
No, you answered.
All right, thanks. Do I continue or any more? There were quite a few hands, but yeah.
I have just a comment I was trying to clarify to me. So the problem with those customers, what banks that we call there, was the word is switching cost.
Yes.
Right? So is it so that the market entry should be not where there's most customer pain, most value, but where there's enough customer pain and low switching costs?
That's a good way of putting it, yes.
And then a comment on the HB, true sailors don't have B.
Yes, it's the journey which is more important. I agree. But in this day and age, sometimes people just have this they have a job to get back to, or the home port, something like family home. But I agree with you. Then one thing to talk about is monetizing the pain, and which actually is really translates to business model. I don't know, did you have this business model discussion already?
No, you was here.
Okay, all right.
Last week.
All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but it's really, again, it's about understanding how you make money. So let's assume that you've now identified who your customer is, what their pain is, somehow maybe if there's a pain chain, but now you need to figure out how you're going to make money. And again, it's very good for you to understand, like, especially this chain, if there are many people involved or many companies, what is your place in this chain and where you're going to make the money. Google is a good example. Before that, before Google validated their model, there wasn't really a very kind of dominant business model for search engines. There were some paid listings and so on, but it wasn't really, proven. But once Google came up with their thing, it kind of validated that business model for search engines. But then I think the interesting thing here is what we're seeing now a lot is these freemium models where you give something for free to you, but someone else actually pays that. And to be able to do this, you need to understand this kind of pain chain, because you might have a need that you need to find something on the internet, so I can give you like free search, but there might be someone else who would be very happy to talk to you and willing to pay for that if we know something about you. So hence the business model where the search engine, it's kind of validated. And I think there are lots of examples of this where these kind of indirect models are coming more and more prevalent. The other example is this freemium model where you offer something for free for a while, or for limited storage or whatever, and then you start charging for the extra features or extra storage or extra whatever. And there the idea is really that you kind of cover the market with kind of free users, but then once you learn a bit more about the users, you can start offering them something extra, which they might pay for, or then you just know that there's the the kind of the baseline of the market, which is never going to pay. But then on top of that, there are some smaller group of users, but they're willing to pay more. And then you should kind of figure out where you want to be here. Do you just want to go to get the cream from the top and get the rest of it for free, or is it something that you try to monetize it throughout the entire pyramid? But it really depends on your industry and your solution. Then I think I've talked a bit about this, but it's I think worth mentioning again. This value proposition. How do you articulate your offering, how it solves the customer's problem or the pain or the need that they have? And that is really, it's a fundamental thing to understand what this means. Because often, like I said earlier, people confuse value proposition with lists of features, for instance. Like our system is the best because it has this and that and this and that feature, which is not a value proposition. It's really about how you provide value to the customer, how you make their lives easier or better or something, how you provide value to them.
One question on that, I mean, sometimes the value could be to the end user in B2B2C area.
Sorry?
Sometimes the value could be to the end user, like in B2B2C area. I mean, it may not be immediate sort of for business to understand how it will add value, but it could be beneficial to the end customer, which can in turn generates more benefit to the business. So that's how do you communicate this kind of thing? Hey, we are going to do something so your users can find you easily, or people can do more business with your thing.
But like your booking system, for instance, it provides value to the end customer. Because for me, it's easier to book an appointment using my phone. But for the physician, for instance, it provides clear value also because it saves their time, or it saves money because there are less cancellations, or if there is a cancellation, you can resell the slot and so on. So I mean, you can translate it to tangible, like clear value, which can actually, and the best thing actually is this value proposition, if you can translate it into monetary figures. Like with this, you save so much time or so much money, and usually time and money can be kind of interchanged. So that is the most valuable way for demonstrating your value proposition.
To me, it's more like guiding customer to admit that he has paid. If you start talking like, how is your booking system? Well, it's okay. And then you ask like, well, how do you do? And then we have this and this, and then how much time they spend, or do you have cancellations? Yes. And then you come up with a value proposition. Would it be beneficial for you if your doctors would have more time and less cancellations and with zero cost? Would it be beneficial for you? And that is you just guide for the admission that okay, I do have a problem.
I totally agree.
That's a good point.
There's
What do you think of let's say price as the indicator of the quality?
Price as the indicator of
at least at the initial stage. I mean, so far we're getting the following feedback and like from people are like, just keep repeating that. I mean, low price tag will...
It's too cheap.
Too cheap and
to be good.
You will just be not considered at all. So put a price tag, then to kind of reevaluate if that's really worth that.
That's a valid point. I mean, if you're, people are, I think the human nature is well, at least in Finland, well, in many countries, is by definition, people doubt, or are kind of cynical in a way and also doubtful. So if you're offering something like too good to be true at a very low price, there must be something wrong with it. So I agree that it might be, but then you can do, you can test, you just put a very high price tag and see how it happens.
Easy to go down.
maybe the point here is that your value proposition and pricing has to be in sync.
Yeah.
Or even more, how customer perceives value and your pricing has to be in sync. So.
Indeed. Johan.
Yes, pricing is a very powerful tool for positioning in the market, and commonly startups sell way too cheap. Yes. So they position themselves into the low categories, and that's a very common mistake.
Dangerous.
And therefore, for example, in the software, it's very difficult to have a fact-based pricing, because how do you do it? I mean, the cost of producing software from a cloud, for example, that's zero, virtually zero. So that can be used as a basis for your pricing. So it's more on the positioning and the value proposal, like I said there, and the strategic level of how you want to address your customer.
And it's extremely costly and I think difficult to get from the low level to the high. I mean, if you're offering a kind of a entry-level solution, and then you try to, after a while, say that then we're going to go for the top, and we're going to say that we have the best system or the best service or the high-end thing. Going from the low end to the high end is extremely difficult. And I can think of a few examples like Samsung, LG, or Lucky Gold Star actually, and some others.
Kia.
Sorry?
Kia invests heavily now to kind of raise the...
But it's massive amounts of money that these, especially Koreans actually now. Next is going to be, it used to be the Japanese, now it's the Koreans, next is going to be the Chinese, Indians, maybe Brazilians, building their brands, like Haier or Geli or whatever they're called. Soon they're going to be big. I mean, ZTE is already, I mean, we see it here in the shops. There's, I mean, they are coming out, cool. And today we are laughing at them because they are somehow inferior. But in 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to have a lot of hires in our home. I think the one thing which is also important that has been touched here, Johan mentioned that earlier as well, and you pointed about this go-to-market. It's very important for you to understand how you kind of articulate what you're doing and how you, kind of think of it as a story line. You're here now and you want to end up there. And just as in like your games, for instance, you're not necessarily going to reveal immediately like this is where you're going to head. Maybe for the investors you might need to paint the picture that this is your goal, or like the grand vision. But for consumers especially, it usually doesn't, I mean, I think companies often make this mistake that they start with the grand vision and they deliver something inferior, because it's all about really managing expectations. And I think there are good examples of how you can do this successfully, this kind of go-to-market. So even if you have a grand vision of global domination and offering everything for everyone, you should start with this kind of baby steps and offer like free calls on the internet, an easy way to connect with your friends, or something like that. And then it might evolve gradually to something much bigger. Like for instance, Facebook is a good example. It started with me being able to connect with you. I have my photo there and maybe some blah blah about me, like LinkedIn and all the others. But now, what Facebook it actually is, it's a gaming platform. I think you can watch films on Facebook nowadays. It's soon going to be probably one of the largest international, like global trade platforms. You can imagine lots of different things that they can do on this. But if I had, if they had come to me or consumers and say that Facebook is going to be this and that and this and that, like you can watch films on Facebook and so on, when they introduce the service, you would be massively disappointed because usually you can't deliver all the different things, all the different features of the value propositions in one go. Like you don't have the, although some people try to do this, or some companies, they try to kind of build a massive thing and then they go out to the market, and usually they fail miserably because still it hasn't been tested, proven, and secondly, it doesn't really match the expectations that they built. So my point is really, even if you have a very grand vision, go with a very narrow niche offering out first. Test it, and then gradually start expanding it so that it's like the big thing that you're building. Any questions or comments on this? Then this is my final point. So how do you find the pain, what the customer has? And there's a very simple answer, it's talk. And talk and talk and talk and talk. So speak to them. Or actually, even more important, listen. So get to know the people and listen to them. So a good example of this again from B2B world is going to a trade show, for instance, like an exhibition. And there often you have this kind of really over-eager salespeople at these stands. And if you're walking there in like an exhibition hall, and then you come to a stand there, and then there's this usually a young guy who almost attacks you and starts talking about like, we have this and this feature, that feature, it's so great, blah, 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 blah. And then you're just like, okay, fine, I'll take a few brochures and then I leave. The other way of doing it is, and you usually see this, some older guys or ladies doing this, they actually just observe you walking around the stand, looking at some stuff, then they come to talk to you. Actually, what they really want to do is just make you talk. Tell something. I mean, it's the same thing if you went to, like if you're buying a stereo or a TV, you go to the shop, and if, at least for me, I get really annoyed if someone just starts telling me that this is the best TV you need to buy, blah, 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 because it's the test, want to test and blah, blah, blah. The better sales guy usually does this, that they're kind of relaxed, they ask maybe a few questions and try to get you to talk about what your needs are. And that's really, it doesn't really matter what the setting is, what you're offering, whether it's a product, service, gadget, solution, whatever you want to call it, for consumers or for corporates. Talk to the people, learn to know them, listen and listen and listen and understand, and then constantly be on alert and be able to, and willing to modify first your story, and later on when you go back to home or back to the office, to be able to, or to willing to be, to modify the positioning or the story, or maybe in some cases even the product that you're offering. Because that's really, it's a very iterative process, and very few get it right the first time they try. But you need to go back and forth and do it, and then you learn. And this is actually, I think, I don't have anything against consultants per se, but I would heavily advise you to do this yourselves. You can maybe use a consultant to some sort of a market research, find you some, like a desk research, find you some information from the internet, for instance, if you're too busy to do it yourselves. But going to talk to customers, I would not outsource that. Because especially if it's the first customers, you, as the founders or managers of companies, entrepreneurs, you should be the ones to talk to the people and to really get the raw data. Because if it's through a consultant, they go to talk to prospective customers, they produce a result or a report. It might be very biased, or the customer might say certain things. The consultant is just doing a gig, they don't really know your product very well, and they're maybe not focusing on the essential things. And for them, it's just a consulting assignment. You, as a founder of a company or an entrepreneur, for you, it can be extremely valuable to hear the raw first-hand input from a customer, because they can tell you things that you never thought about. I mean, okay, this could be a different speech altogether, like Plan B. That's actually good. You should probably, I don't know, have you spoken to or thought about this, like Plan Bs? Because very few companies actually, especially the successful ones that we know today, are started with that plan. Like the initial business plan very seldom is the one which takes off. PayPal is a good example. PayPal, I don't know how many knew this, originally the business idea with which they also got funded was about transferring money from one Palm Pilot to another Palm Pilot, so beaming it, which is not, I think, a huge market, and well, some of the VCs thought it was, and they funded it, but actually what was cool, I don't know exactly how this process went, but they figured out that actually beaming money from one PayPal to another is not the big market, but they had some cryptographic excellence and some other technical stuff which was kind of really valuable, and when they noticed that they actually, instead of beaming from one Palm Pilot to another and sending the stuff by email is really the thing. And I'd say that the best way to discover how to, I think pivot was last year the word, and it's really about changing your business model, or changing your go-to-market, or changing whatever you're doing, changing the business plan, some essential parts of it. This pivoting, the only way to really do it successfully and intelligently is to talk to your customers or prospective customers and listen what they have to say, and then modify accordingly.
And that's exactly only a founder can do on the fly when you're meeting the customer. That's like, I have first-hand experience a couple of weeks back, so I think that's the best thing. We were also trying to hire a sales guy, and we already interviewed a few of them. But I think we decided not to hire till we have at least first 5 customers where the founders will be selling.
Yeah, because you might end up changing your business model, or you might change your product. You might realize that actually this technology platform is much better suited for that. We thought that the customer group X is the one where we're going to go. Actually, it's not. It's the next one, or it's in the periphery or something. So it is extremely valuable to do the sales. It doesn't actually, I wouldn't call it sales, it's business development at that phase. It's not about, I'm trying to sell something to you. It's more like, I'd like to learn to know you better. I'd like to understand what your needs are, and maybe at some point we can build something that helps your life.
Just to add to this, talking to the customer part, we haven't done this yet since our product isn't out yet, but I hope we'll implement it properly. So looking at especially software B2C stuff, so talking to the customer doesn't only mean like physical talking or typing to them, but there are methods to, or ready libraries that you can implement into your website, service, or whatever, that basically you can see where all your customers have moved their mouse and which buttons they actually click, what pages, what parts of the screen they actually see and what not. That's one thing, and then like in your software itself, like you'd be best off to track like everything, everything you can just imagine, like what the customer is doing, because that's data that not only you can use to even understand what the customer was doing, but also that's data that you can use for like not only investors but to press and wherever to say that this is the stuff that people do.
Yeah, I mean this kind of plans B or piloting. You kind of don't work on 2 ideas in parallel, right? So you just choose one, then test it, then change, right? It's not that you in parallel work on scenario B just in case plan A fails. And
good point. You should not try to hedge your bets, i.e. to bet on too many horses at the same time. That is a common mistake, that because if you're, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur, you're afraid of committing to something. So then you might have a few founders who might disagree a bit, like, oh, we should do this or we should do that. And then you end up with a business plan or business model or proposed a business model for an investor, for instance, where you say that we're going to do this and this. We kind of, or we have these two customer groups which are not related, or we have these two offerings or two whatever. It's not a good idea. You should be courageous enough to bet on one horse, and if it then requires changing your business model or product or whatever, then be able to just to pivot it or just go to plan B.
Biggest or the safest?
Sorry?
Biggest or the safest?
I don't know. And you just you need to commit and just go. And I mean, you should never build a very heavy organization or kind of heavy company. You should try to be very agile. So it's really about how quick or how expensive it is to make changes. The less, well, like less fat you have in the setup, the more easily and more quickly you can make changes. You can try different things. And when I say bet, I don't mean having this one big vision and then you kind of bet everything, your house and everything, and just hit a wall. You should make small bets, like fail fast. Try something, if it doesn't work, try something else, and like small things, and iterate continuously. I think that's about it. And actually, sorry, we have an office here. I'm never there. So if you want to keep it or get in touch with me, it's so it says Vepuri here and .ac. Just send me an email or grab me or talk to Antti or Ville or Juha or whoever, and just get my. No, actually, I can give my phone number as well.
I think we have it.
We have it already.
Yeah. All of you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, well, never mind. Anyway.
Okay, who has used it so far?
I don't know. I've got a few emails. I'm very bad at...
Reply?
No, use the phone. Use the phone. If you have the phone number, just use it. Is there someone who doesn't have my phone number? Ah, okay. Am I right?
You do.
It's in the list.
It's in the
Okay. Okay.
Still good to add. So you can add it right away.
Anyway, call me or SMS me, and if you want to talk, we can arrange a one-on-one. I prefer one-on-ones, they're really nice. And but anyway, I'm going to be here every once in a while. You can also just grab me and talk about anything, or asking about anything or whatever. That's it.
Maybe one quick one. What's the one thing that we should get from Silicon Valley? We're going there in the end of this month. So what's one takeaway we should bring back?
I think the attitude. It's what you often see there, and what you don't see that much here is the kind of the hunger, the drive, and the clock speed.
Sense of urgency.
Yeah, those are things. Here people think that because they don't see the competition, if you're doing something in Finland, in an event like this or in any environment here, you don't have the sense of urgency because no one else is doing what you're the only one doing this thing here. If you go there, or if you go to Asia, which is also, I would heavily recommend going to Asia, it's really fascinating. There are hundreds of other people and companies doing exactly the same thing, or trying to address the same pain try to address the same market, same solution, whatever. And they are really fast, hungry, and they have an attitude.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
very much. You're going to be here for a while, right?
Yep.
So if and when you do have some questions, please use it now.